Blood Brothers podcast, a Five Pillars production.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, friends, and the foes out there, and welcome to another episode of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host, Dilly Hussain. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to remind all the avid podcast listeners that you can find this show on all the major platforms. And if you're tuning in via YouTube, don't just watch the podcast. Do remember to like and share, and of course, subscribe. Today's guest is a dear brother of mine, someone whose work and activism and contribution towards the freedom of his people I have followed and admired from afar. He's an activist, he's a political commentator, and he's the president of the World Kashmir Freedom Movement, and that's none other than Muzzammil Ayyub Thakur. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
My dear brother, I'm honoured to have you on.
It's such a pleasure to finally have met you and to be in your studio and to be discussing issues that matter to both of us,
of course,
and the wider community.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. And I believe when you briefly came on in Ramadan for one of our live appeals, Roshan recognised that he knew your father. May Allah have mercy on him.
Ameen.
And your father was also involved in this justice and freedom and liberation of the Muslims of Kashmir, was he not?
He was, from his student activist days in Kashmir. The funny thing is that he didn't identify the Kashmir issue as a nationalistic issue. So when he heard about issues like Palestine, or for that matter in those days, people hadn't heard of the Rohingya or the Uyghurs. So he even recognized those as issues of the Muslim Ummah. So it was never a nationalistic issue for him. All issues revolved around the same theme, which was the Muslims and the oppression of the Muslims and how to alleviate those sufferings and liberate them.
You know, whenever I talk about the occupation or oppression of Muslims other than Palestinians, I always, especially to students and to the youth, I always say that, look, if I were to ask you, tell me things about Palestine, you'll tell me about the different masajid, the different anbiya where they are believed to have buried. You tell me all the stories which Sahaba are buried there. And of course, we know that there is a scriptural importance of Asham, right?
Absolutely.
But we know the history very well. And I believe that one of the ways in which we can connect with our brothers and sisters who are oppressed and occupied elsewhere is to understand their history and their heritage, because ultimately it's part of the wider jigsaw of Islamic civilization history. So talking about Kashmir, did it all start with partition 1947, or is there things to consider before that?
It's so important to recognize, as you said, that you need to know where you've come from to realize where you're going. 1947 partition, the issue of partition, the creation of Pakistan and India, Kashmir predates all of that. 1846, we were sold by the British Raj to Gulab Singh. So we're going 100 years before the partition. Sold.
What, in return for what?
The land.
Okay.
So literally the people in the land, and we were sold for a very minimal amount of money, which in conversion rates would be a few £1,000s, and a few goats and sheep. That was the value of a Kashmiri. That was the value of his land. Majority of Kashmiris at that time were Muslim. The ruler was a Hindu. But even before that, we have 5,000 to 6,000 years of history, mostly of oppression and occupation, but we have that history. But in the context of the current conflict, it does predate. I would say, I would argue strongly that it does predate the partition. Of course, the partition created a massive role in this, but even during 1931, we had something called the Quit Kashmir movement, which was essentially against the Dogra Raj, who were oppressive against the Kashmiris, who were, high taxes, not allowing education for the common Kashmiris. The Hindus were, the minority Hindus, the Pandits, what we call them there, were the masters of the Kashmiri common man. Common Kashmiris were left to labouring work, physical labour. Education was not really important because it was never given as an opportunity. So 1931 is when the issues, if you want to predate 1947 just a little bit, 1931. So partition, obviously, it engulfed everybody in the region. Everybody had something to say with it. And I would go so far as to say that even on an international global scale, it must have had an impact. In terms of economics, the British economy versus the Indian economy at that time, or as a Raj, what it was completely different to what it was post 1947. The way the Chinese would have been affected, the way that even Central Asia would have been affected.
Of course.
So of course Kashmir would have been affected in the same way. The only difference that I would say in regards to Pakistan and India, the way that it was formed, Kashmir had that simple problem that we were a Muslim majority that had a Hindu ruler, and the so-called rule at the time was that the Muslim majorities would go with Pakistan and Hindu majorities would stay with India. Kashmir's issue of 1947, I mean, when we talk about the princely states,
because that's the story of partition, right?
That's exactly it. So even though that is the story, and a lot of people will say that that's where it started, I don't want to say defense, but our objection started way before that. Our oppression started 100 years, I would say maybe even 5,000 years before that. We've been under different various types of occupations, and some people used to say that it's in our, occupation has been running in our DNA for so long, but at the same time, if in this vein there is occupation, in this vein there is resistance.
Absolutely.
Because we've had to learn. So I would argue very strongly that it predates 1947. 1947 may have catalyzed certain aspects of our resistance, but it definitely was pre-1947.
So allow me to touch upon some of the key years that you did highlight. Let's talk about 1846. The British sold Kashmir for that amount to, what was the Hindu ruler's name?
Gulab Singh.
Prior to that, where was Kashmir? Under the British rule? Under
the British rule. And prior to that, it's been under the Afghanis, it's been under the Sikh, in fact, the Sikh Empire as well. So it's always been the Chakra dynasty had at one point control over Kashmir. Very rarely in our history have we had freedom, so to speak. And the most important aspect of freedom is, what is freedom? It's not the right to vote or elections or economy. It is the ability to express yourself in the way that you want. And for Muslims, it is always the ability to express yourself as a Muslim.
Absolutely.
To be able to go to the masjid, to be able to wear the hijab, to be able to keep a beard. If this sounds very similar to the problems of the Uyghurs, that's,
Absolutely.
It's not new. These stories are, we predate all of this. Not that I have enough knowledge to talk about the Uyghurs in that context, but if we talk about the Uyghurs, it's the same. The Muslims have always had this problem. We talk about the Enlightenment period of the Muslim Ummah, but what happened after that? Why did it go so dark? And why for so long? And why have so many people contributed to that darkness? And obviously it's going to be very difficult to go into the technicalities and understand, and can we really solve it? But the reality is that we need to know what has happened so that we understand what could happen further. The best example that I can give you in this context is 70 years of Kashmiri occupation, of Muslim Kashmiri occupation, is now being seen inside mainland India. What you witness happening to Afreen Fatima, dear sister of mine, what you witness happening to Zubair, the journalist, or any of the other Muslims. Today there was another issue. We warned them. We warned the Indian Muslims for the last 70 plus years. They had their own issues, that is absolutely true. They had to prove their loyalty to India.
They had to prove their Indianness.
Absolutely. We can understand that. But at the same time, you're a Muslim at the end of the day, right? If you're not going to at least support our cause, at least don't condemn us. And I'm not talking about 70 years ago. I'm talking about just even recently. You have the Maulanas, you have the Imams, the scholars inside India that tell us that we are against the haqq.
Absolutely.
That we are the batil. Can you believe that?
Outrageous. So 1931 was another year that you highlighted. Tell me the significance of that.
So certain leaders inside Kashmir rose against the Dogra Raj. They wanted liberation from the oppression that he had subjugated on the people, taxes, land reforms, general oppression and subjugation of the Muslims. That was an important year. It gave rise to what I would say a more common theme of resistance coming onto the streets, something that maybe hadn't happened often inside Kashmir. That was probably the first time major protests had occurred inside Kashmir on a mass scale. So we've been protesting for more than a century for reforms inside Kashmir. And when I mean reforms, I don't mean political reforms, I'm talking about freedom from oppression and occupation. So that Dogra Raj, the so-called King Maharaja of Kashmir, started making deals, and you know what happens when
Of
you
course.
have certain people in power, and
Of
power
course.
goes to their head, and then they make compromises. And when they make compromises, it is not just a compromise on their own beliefs and their own self and their own character. They compromise on behalf of an entire nation.
Absolutely.
And because of that, Kashmir has been further occupied, further subjugated. So people, the Sheikh Abdullahs of their time, that were the so-called leaders of Kashmir, that went out to liberate Kashmir from oppression, suddenly became the oppressor himself.
SubhanAllah. We, from the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Kashmir, we know of the horror stories of partition. You know, our grandmothers, our grandparents, their parents will narrate stories of the scramble and the havoc that took place when literally overnight it was announced that there'll be an East and West Pakistan, there'll be in India, Muslims go to East and West, and the Hindus come towards India. And you'll find that in the borders of Bangladesh with Calcutta, with Assam. You'll find that with the Muhajirs, as Pakistanis call them, the ones that came from India. What happened in Kashmir? If you're telling me that Kashmir as a region was demographically majority Muslim, are you saying that during partition time, those that are now in Azad were the ones in India unable to make it across in time?
The people of Kashmir didn't need to physically move anywhere. We are naturally, geographically linked to Pakistan. Historically, we have been, our natural markets have been inside Pakistan. So there is this nara, there is this, the nara, how do you translate nara into English?
This
Protest, the
protest?
No, you know when you make anthems, not anthems. Oh, this is so embarrassing.
No, it's good. I like it. It's what makes a podcast original. Tell me the word.
Hum kya chahte azad. You know, slogans.
Slogans.
That's the word.
Yeah.
Slogans. My God. So
Pakistan ki matlab kya? La ilaha illallah.
But at the same time, hamari mandi Rawalpindi. Our markets are in Rawalpindi. My ancestors used to travel regularly to Pakistan to do trade.
Yeah.
Because it was nobody went to Delhi, nobody went to Gujarat, nobody went to Ahmedabad, nobody went to Kerala, or for that matter, nobody went to Assam.
Yeah.
Pakistan was just there.
Yeah.
It was always just there. The Silk Route went through Kashmir. So even for China, we have been a hub for and connecting the West and the East. When I talk about West and East, we talk about in terms of Central Asia. We've been that for so many years. You know how you have pit stops and you have the service stations? That was us. That was always us. So we didn't need to physically move. So people that were in, for example, Gujarat may have had to physically move. Those were in Kerala or in Delhi may have had to move. We were there. Literally, if Kashmir had been given its independence, all they had to do was move the border just a little bit. That was it. Physically, nobody had to move.
What's a little bit?
All the way up to, well, I would say all the way up to Jammu.
Okay.
You see, we even have natural mountains that separate us from India. It's funny. I mean, if you physically look at
It's
Kashmir,
as if Allah created that way.
my God, it is the best way to present that case.
Yeah.
Allah had naturally created a separation of the Muslims from the Hindus through that line of Kashmir, through the mountains of Kashmir. Unfortunately, it
didn't pan out that way.
It didn't pan out that way. In fact, if I may, I cannot cite the reference right now, but I have this on good authority, and I'm sure that I read this as well, that at the time of partition, the British had said that leave the condition of the subcontinent in such a way that for the next 100 years, they will not be able to develop, nor will they be able to catch up to the West.
This is a very well-known statement that was said by a British, subhanAllah.
It wasn't Lord Mountbatten, was it?
No, it wasn't Lord Mountbatten, but I'm going to try find it, and when I find it, I'm going to put it at the bottom of the screen.
It's so important because
Yeah.
it explains so much that has happened over the last 50-odd years.
Now, you know, when we talk about the occupation of Kashmir, you know, you said just earlier on, you said, look, we are a people who have dealt with occupation and oppression for thousands of years. So naturally that predates Islam, right? However, it has become for many an Islamic issue. It has become for many an Islamic cause. Revivalist scholars, du'at, revivalist movements, people who are non-Kashmiri, they are involved and they talk about it and raise awareness about it for the very reason that they believe it to be an Islamic cause. So I will posit to you, has India's policies towards the people of Kashmir been unique to Islam and Muslims, or is it just that it happens to be that Muslims are the inhabitants of this region that they want to keep and occupy? Let me give you an example. So with the Uyghurs, it's a very common argument that, it doesn't matter that the Uyghurs are Muslims. If there was someone else,
It would have been the same.
it would have been the same. If it was Tibetan monks, it would have been the same. If it was Christians, it would have been the same. But because it happens to be the Uyghurs, that is why they're experiencing what they're experiencing.
They're
Because
just wrong place, wrong time.
wrong place, wrong time. And it just happens to be that Muslims hold their religion so dearly and wear it on their sleeve that one of the ways in which to attack them and to defeat them and to demoralize them is to attack their religion. It's not necessarily to do with the religion or the religious demographic of the people.
The Sikhs inside Kashmir wear their religion on their sleeves as well. They're not oppressed in the same way that the Muslims are. They aren't subjugated the same way that Muslims, although as a community, they obviously suffer as well. But they haven't been targeted like that, apart from the obvious fake encounters that have happened. The Christians, the Buddhists, they don't suffer the same way. This India, this notion of India, is not Gandhi's India. It was never Gandhi's India. This, some kind of wearing a toga kind of, bespectacled guy, and very, very calm.
This peace-loving.
That's not what it was. It was never that. Anybody that tells you that is living in La La Land. The truth is that the BJP, the
RSS,
essentially the RSS. That's where the BJP comes from. Was formed during the times of Nazi Germany. They modelled themselves based on Nazi Germany. If you read their literature, forget the literature. Why go into history? Let's talk about current events. Let's talk about more recent events. Let's look at the way that they present when they have their community engagements, how they do their salutes. And I'm not going to do that because that is very, very, very offensive in this country.
Of course.
The hand raising.
It's the same. It's
exactly the same. Anybody that tells you otherwise, or they say it's a coincidence, you tell me, if I accidentally pretended to, do something similar, I would be arrested on the spot in this country.
Absolutely.
It is not an accident. It is not a coincidence. It is on purpose. It is by design that they believe in these principles, this Aryan race. They always talk about the Aryan race. They believe they are the Aryan race, the superior race, this Hindutva race. And that is what they've always wanted. So when we talk about, in the context of Kashmir, the ideology that we're looking, or the effects of RSS and Hindutva and radical Hindutva that we're seeing inside India, the laboratory experiment was always Kashmir. Those trials have been exported to mainland India now. So this isn't new. This has been going on as long as Nazi Germany was around. So we're talking about people that have modelled themselves on Nazism, modelled themselves on fascism, something that everybody thought that they had crushed after the defeat of Nazi Germany. And you see sporadic bits and bobs in certain places, be it in Eastern Europe or even in the UK or anywhere else in the world. You see those, tiny little minorities, and they're clamped down on. And maybe they rebrand themselves. These people aren't even rebranding. They're not rebranding.
No.
They openly praise Adolf Hitler. I can't emphasize this enough, that it is akin to a Muslim, or for that matter anybody, an Arab, praising Abu Lahab.
Of course.
And then modelling themselves on that. These people are the Abu Lahabs. They want to eradicate the Muslim identity permanently.
Okay, so just to stay on that point, brothers and sisters, you can go to 5 Pillars, and there's other websites, Doam and many others. You can see that in RSS training, the tens and thousands of children are being raised to basically justify genocide against Muslims.
With swords and guns.
With swords and guns.
While just a couple of days ago, a Muslim was teaching martial arts.
Yeah.
Regular martial arts, was arrested for terrorism.
Absolutely. There's been loads of kids drama plays of burning mosques, the Kaaba burning, all kinds of arms training. So we know the level of indoctrination is strong. And what's more concerning, and I think many non-Muslim viewers and listeners don't actually grasp this, is how big the constituency of support is.
Absolutely.
For that ideology
Absolutely.
in India. Brothers and sisters, I think sometimes we forget, when we talk about Modi, the BJP, and its ideological foundation, which is RSS, these people have a huge constituency of support in India, including within the Bollywood establishment. We're talking easily in the hundreds of millions, I would say. Because Modi won 2 general elections quite confidently and strongly. And of course, we're not saying that every single person who voted for him is an RSS member. But there will be a spectrum
Yes.
Of those who tolerate what they believe to those who actually advocate belief and will implement what the
And then
ideology
there
is.
are those that believe he's too soft.
Of course.
Because people are now looking towards Yogi Adityanath.
Who's an absolute nut job.
I mean, that's putting it lightly. I mean, we're talking about a genocidal maniac.
Absolutely.
Who's talking about, digging up the graves of... Listen, I mean, look, I'm talking to you, but I'm also talking to the audience. This guy is telling the Hindus, the fundamentalist, fascist Hindus, to dig up the graves of Muslim women and rape them. Have some shame, have some ghira.
And I guess what I want to ask you again then is, to go back to the initial question, if the birth of India was modelled around the RSS ideology and it was kind of moulding and learning and it was fraternizing around the period of Nazi Germany, you're saying that then inevitably the Muslims will be the number one target to remove from India.
Absolutely.
Because from a demographic point of view, we would pose a threat, right? Hence why we see now Hollywood making a lot of revisionist movies, Panipat, glorifying Akbar, and the kind of usual stuff, right? A Hindu would say, why is that a problem? A Hindu would say to you and I, Dilly, Muzzammil, why is that a problem? Because in your Muslim lands, surely you'd want the majority, the power and the authority to be with the majority of the Muslims. Surely you would want to implement your Sharia and you'd probably pursue those who oppose it publicly or proselytize to another way of life publicly. Whereas you guys do your dawah, you do your maulanas, you have your mullahs, you have your masjids, you kill our cows and you distribute it and eat it in Eid, whilst we are number one exporters elsewhere. What's the problem? What is the problem with us wanting our own Hindu Rashtra?
No, nothing whatsoever.
Okay.
Just don't eliminate the Muslims. Muslims aren't eliminating Hindus. How many Hindus live in the Middle East, in the Gulf states, that send billions of dollars every month back to India? And how many of those Hindus have been subjugated, oppressed, tortured, killed, maimed, buried from their graves and raped? How many of them have been arrested for practicing their own religion? How many of their homes have been destroyed or occupied? Not a single one. Name me one. You can't. They can't.
No.
Even if they make it up, they'd have to think of for a while, and we'd be able to point out those mistakes. The reality is that fundamentalist Hindutva believes in Akhand Bharat, a pan-Hindu nation. When again, I'm re-emphasizing that they believe the same thing as Nazi Germany, that if you are not of the Aryan race, you must be eliminated. They want to create another Holocaust. They appreciated the Holocaust. So it is not just about the Muslims right here. It's coming to me now. I don't know why I never thought about this before, but it is not just an issue for the Muslims. Frankly, the Jews should also be concerned. When they said that never again, the Holocaust should never happen again, it's about to happen. Just maybe not with you, but it's happening with somebody else. So if you genuinely believe that the Holocaust shouldn't happen again, it's happening. Genocide is happening. Not going to happen, it's happening. We've seen it. We're seeing it every single day. It's just that nobody in the mainstream is reporting it, apart from people like Five Pillars and a few other brothers and sisters that talk about this.
On a historical point of view, would it not be correct that if the various Muslim rulers and empires and sultanates that came to India, that if they were truly about forcibly converting Hindus to Muslim, then India would have been demographically Muslim majority, but it wasn't.
Exactly.
For the best part of a millennia, it wasn't.
In fact, I would go so far as to say that a lot of the Hindu shrines and their temples and things that they hold dear were maintained by those Muslim rulers. That although that there may have been random acts of violence by people that may not necessarily represented the state, but the state itself at that time tried, from what I have read, I could be wrong, they tried to maintain a level of decorum or democracy or equality among the people. That maybe this is going too far to say, but lakum dinukum waliyadin. You follow your religion, we'll follow ours. 100%.
And I'm going to echo that, Muzzammil, because even whilst trying to research moments of the Delhi Sultanate or the Mughals or the various other Muslim states and empires that ruled in various parts of India, I was finding it very hard to find examples of where there was an outright policy of forced conversions, or even like in many cases, jizya wasn't even imposed on them.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So honestly, I find it so hard to find instances in Islamic history in India where Muslim rulers, forcibly carried out massacres and genocides for the sake of them refusing to become Muslim. I couldn't find it.
Exactly. Maybe yes. Look,
there were instances here and there, but it wasn't a state policy that ran for years.
Exactly.
I couldn't find it.
It doesn't exist. And that's an argument. So when some of these Hindus, they look towards the Muslim, they say, oh, but you people believe in this and you want to eliminate us. Well, give us an example. When has that ever happened? Leave the Middle East. When has it happened in your own homes over the last millennia? It never happened. So that threat doesn't exist to them. And an oppressor cannot oppress because there is a potential threat from a minority. It doesn't work that way. That's not logic. I mean, what is that? That's a preemptive strike. Where have you heard that before?
Yeah, exactly. It's actually interesting enough. The guys before you were speaking about pre-crime.
Yes.
Yeah, like how can you pursue and let alone convict on pre-crime?
Exactly.
Like
I mean, that's what thought police and intention police. It doesn't work that way.
So how big and mainstream is the Hindutva ideology in India as we speak right now?
Growing every single day. If it wasn't that mainstream, they wouldn't be in power. The other thing is that there is a problem with the opposition as well. The Congress, or anybody for that matter, that often people will say the BJP is so bad that the opposition must be opposite because they're called the opposition, so they have to be opposite. That's not true. I will ask you, the 3 wars that India and Pakistan fought,
they're all under Congress.
They were all under every single one was under the Congress. Every single one. And people seem to forget that. And this is so important that the BJP haven't launched a war against Pakistan so far. The Congress did. But does that mean the BJP is better than the Congress? Absolutely not. The Congress didn't commit genocide in Kashmir the same way that the BJP are doing, or they seem to be a slightly softer Sangis. Does that mean they're better than the BJP?
Of course not.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's a bit like saying that, what do they say, that a leopard never changes its spots. The position that a person holds inside India or in Western superpowers, let's talk, for example, America, irregardless of who the president of the United States is, the policy is always going to be the same.
Absolutely.
And it's the same thing in Kashmir, in India for that matter, that whoever is going to be the prime minister, whichever party is going to be, they will never concede that Kashmir should have its right to self-determination. They will never allow the success of the Muslims. They will never give parity to the minorities, even their own minorities in the Dalits, as we talked about. So it's just 2 sides of the same coin.
Brothers and sisters, the point that Muzzammil Bhai has just made, for those of you wondering what it was, what we're basically saying is that whether it's Keir Starmer or I don't know, Rishi Sunak, someone who's in power, it doesn't matter if it's Labour or Tories, there's certain non-negotiables when it comes to state policies. Foreign policies tend to be this. That's why Corbyn was so considered quite radical.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It was something outside of the norm of what's expected from British establishment leaders, irrespective of parties.
And that's called radicalism.
Exactly. Similarly with US administrations, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, there's certain non-negotiables. For example, their policy on Israel will always be the same.
Absolutely.
It's a non-negotiable. So you're saying that whether it's Congress or BJP, the position on Kashmir is a non-negotiable one.
Absolutely.
And they will never concede that it does not belong to them.
Absolutely. And there is evidence of this year in, year out. We've seen in various different governments. Now, they'll tell you that during the era of Manmohan Singh, who was another Congress Prime Minister at the time, that there was Aman and Shanti. Rubbish. Just because they say there was Aman and Shanti, there was peace and development in Kashmir, that doesn't mean that's true. There was still resistance. Tell me a day that nobody in Kashmir that nobody resisted. One day, everybody resists in one shape or form, the same way as the Palestinians. Just because that the world media does not recognize or has not picked up on news that somebody has been killed or martyred or arrested inside Palestine, doesn't mean that nothing has happened.
Of course.
There's always something happening. So it's, in our opinion, and I'm sure that the Muslims inside India have also woken up to this new generation of Muslims, they've realized that the mistakes of their elders in the past, they can't go back to partition and critique them for that. Whatever happened, happened.
Of course.
But it is about the elders of the generation that have said that we need to live in this country, so therefore we need to, bow our backs a little bit.
And not rock the boat.
I don't think that's a valid argument. If you want, what do they say? That you get the leaders that you deserve.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you don't want to change your condition, Allah is not going to change it for you.
100%. And not only that, this whole kind of like, don't rock the boat. I mean, let me give another anecdotal example. When there's an act of terrorism that's committed by someone who identifies as a Muslim, you'll find our faith leaders tripping off over themselves to come and condemn, right? And I've spoken to many of them. I said, where has condemnation got us in 20 years of war on terror?
Exactly.
If we could see an improvement in our situation, in how our community is treated, perceived, seen, dealt with, then I can say, you know what? Condemning preemptively, it's got plus sides to it, it's got pros to it.
And we'll join you.
And we will carry on doing it. But if for 20 years the situation is getting worse and you still are doing it, it makes no sense. So, no, there's only so much you can say, don't rock the boat, until you realise that not rocking the boat has got us into the situation that we're in.
Absolutely.
And, it's a dire one. We're approaching August, which would then be 3 years anniversary of the revocation of Article 35A and then Article 370. For many Muslims who didn't know about the occupation of Kashmir and the conflict that's taking place there, 2019 August would have been possibly the first time in some level of detail they would have heard about this situation. What is Article 35A and Article 370? And why was its revocation so significant?
As a Kashmiri, I will tell you it means nothing to me. It was a toffee. It was a band-aid. It was something that the Indians gave us to make sure that that they could subdue us. That you can have your own constitution, you can have your own parliament, you can have your own little state, but you're still kind of Indian. That was what 370 and 35A was. It gave a level of so-called protection. I use this term very, very loosely. A level of protection for Kashmiris, for their land, so that no foreigner outside of Kashmir could come and purchase the land. That's it. So I understand that people became antagonized or they learnt about Kashmir, and that's great that people understood Kashmir from that context. But for Kashmiris, I mean, 35A and 370, before and after, tell me, were rapes still happening? Yes, they were. Enforced disappearance still happening? Yes, they were. Children were being blinded? Yes, they were. People were being exiled? Yes, they were. Journalistic freedoms were being clamped on? Yes. So 370, 35A, whether it existed or not, the conditions of Kashmiris were still the same.
So why did it receive so much attention that it did?
Land grab. It's the same thing as what happened with Sheikh Jarrah, right? Constitutional changes often create news for international media houses, particularly for foreign offices, because it's constitutions, which means that anything can change, which means borders can change, wars can happen. Anything. It's basically a tinderbox. And more importantly, it's the reaction that could have happened. So when India decided to do what they did, illegally, mind you, against the United Nations resolutions, the perception in the West was, what is Pakistan's reaction going to be? What is the Muslim world's reaction going to be? More importantly, what's China's reaction going to be? And China showed how they're going to react. They decided to occupy a part of Ladakh. And incrementally, they are taking it inch by inch by inch. Now, the Indian news houses won't tell you, but the opposition, people like Swani, what's his name? Something Swani, he's a long name. A bit of a mental case. But he has reports that he's published on Twitter and other social media platforms that China are incrementally taking more and more land from the undisputed area between India and China, let alone the Kashmir part. So there are consequences. How impactful, how entrenched, and how far it will go, we can only presume. A lot of it depends on you and me, the common people. How long that we're going to keep an interest in this, how much we're going to lobby for this, how much we're going to keep this in the news, who's going to create the pressure groups, where is this going to go? So in fact, I'll even remind you that when Keir Starmer came into power, the various Muslim organizations that represented other Muslim organizations held certain round tables with the Labour Party at the time. And then the Indian lobby, which is a very strong lobby, an invisible lobby, not unsimilar to, what are they called, APAC in America?
APAC in America.
Not unsimilar to that. The invisible lobby pushed back to Keir Starmer, who had to not necessarily retract, but amend his statement about having relations with India.
Absolutely.
So there are consequences in the greater scheme of things. But for the individual common Kashmiri, now I understand that you and me, we love talking about foreign policy. We love talking about the Muslim Ummah. We are really entrenched with the community, and we want to understand and find routes for solutions on a grand scale. The problem is that what am I going to tell a young girl who was 14 years old, Insha, who was blinded with pellets? How am I going to explain to her what Keir Starmer's policy is? What does she care? What does she care about Article 317.35a? Tufail Mattu and Mamik Farooq's father, both these young boys that were killed by tear gas and bullets, and other children that have been killed and martyred, what do their parents care about 317.35a? It makes no difference to them. The cousins that I have in jail, or other people's family that are being constantly harassed, what difference does 35 and 370 have? Or for that matter, this grand scheme of nuclear powers and CPEC and One Belt, One Road initiative and NATO and Ukraine and global warming and climate change, and how are you going to explain that to a mother that hasn't seen her son for 35 years and doesn't know whether he's dead or alive? What do you tell a half-widow, a woman that hasn't seen her husband for God knows how long, that whether she can get remarried or not? What do they care about these things? How does it matter to them? So when we talk about the RSS and all it is so important that we recognize it. But it is even more important to understand the impact that it has on the individuals, the children, the women, the old, the young, anybody. I'll give you examples. 35A and 370, what happened during that time? Media blackout. All the economies were shut down, creating trillions of dollars of damage. Infrastructure was damaged. Healthcare was damaged. There was somebody narrated to me an ordeal of a young woman that was trying to go to the hospital to give birth to a child. The military refused to give her passage because there was a curfew. She was clearly pregnant. And she gave birth to a stillborn baby on the side of the road. Tell her about 317.35a. Tell her about Ukraine. Tell her about climate change and the 40 degrees that we're about to have. There are so many different stories that exist inside Kashmir that...
Tell our people about, was it your cousins who were kidnapped and then from the mosque speakers?
One story among many. I'm not that relevant. I mean, it wasn't just him. There were many, many young boys that were picked up in the middle of the night, as young as 4 or 5 years old. Some were taken into the local masajids. The loudspeakers were turned on and they were tortured under loudspeaker to instill fear and terror among the local population, to make sure that nobody came out to protest. They picked up tens of thousands of people preemptively, 5th of August 2019, to make sure that these community leaders, these people that come onto the streets to protest, these people that pelt stones, that write articles, that tweet, that they wouldn't provide information. They shut down the internet, complete blackout, complete media ban. Nobody knew what was happening. For months upon end, we had no idea what was happening with our loved ones. Some guy texted me and he was crying and he said to me that, finally, I saw my mum. I said, how in God's name did you see your mum? He said there was a news report on an Indian channel and I saw my mother, she's alive. A young man found out that his fiancée had died 4.5 months after she had died because there was no communication. And the family members had no idea how to tell him. So these are real life case stories, and this isn't something that happened in 1974 or 1983 or 1997. This happened just not even. We're talking about 2019, but stuff is happening every single day. Just a few days ago, another young couple of people that were resisting against the Indian occupation were martyred. Again, young boys. Other people put in different cases, like a journalist, Fahad Shah, Asif Sultan, so many others that I'm tripping over myself right now. So many others that are languishing in jail because they're apparently enemies of the state. They're instigating the people. Imagine the British government, the intelligence services, the police, all the institutions in the United Kingdom coming to pick you up because you're telling the truth, because you're reporting something that has actually happened. Not your opinion. Journalists inside Kashmir know better than to write their opinion. just doing their journalistic duties.
Just reporting down the middle.
That's it. And they get picked up. And they go to jail for an indefinite amount of time.
Look, it's as you narrate and describe these stories, it's hard to listen to it. And any Muslim with ghayra for his brothers and sisters will naturally be angered, right? But it is the channeling of this anger into something that's fruitful and meaningful for our brothers and sisters. I mean, I know it's not politically correct or even safe in certain environments to say that it is a normal feeling for Muslim boys and men to hear about the plight of their brothers and sisters, irrespective of where they are, and they want to literally physically go and help.
I'm so sorry to cut you up. Just a couple of days ago, you and I and the rest of the Muslim communities were remembering Srebrenica.
Of course.
That's all I'm going to say.
That's it.
And at that time, it was justified.
Yeah.
And everybody was supporting it.
100%.
Why not now?
There used to be fundraisers for the jihad on university campuses in the UK because it was okay with the foreign policy of Britain at the time.
Exactly.
There was a time where it was okay for people to go and fight in Libya to fight Gaddafi. There were time in the very early period, 2011 and 12, where Britain turned a blind eye to Muslims going and fighting Bashar.
Yes.
Until it then became problematic, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say to you is, whilst Article 35A and 370 was the starter point for many Muslims to realise, of course it's important for them to know that it probably had little to no actual effect to Kashmiris on the ground facing the occupation and oppression every day. But that said, given that 2019 August did happen and there was international coverage around it, can we at least see that as a PR positive plus point in terms of getting the conversation started?
Absolutely. It is for those that did not know about Kashmir, or for those people that forgot about Kashmir, or for those people that had something in their hearts for Kashmir but didn't really know what to do. This was the perfect opportunity for people to be reinvigorated, reminded, and find out exactly what is happening. It gives people an opportunity to act the same way they acted for the people of Bosnia, the same way they acted for the people of Palestine and continue to act for Palestine, for the Rohingya, for the Uyghurs, for the Afghans, for the Syrians, for anybody. Are we not part of that Muslim Ummah, Dilly?
Yeah, of course.
Do we not bleed in the words of Shakespeare? Do we not have two eyes, two ears, a nose, and a mouth? Do we not have the same blood running in our veins as you?
100%.
Are we not part of that Ummah?
Of course. Bringing it to a topic which we kind of touched upon previously about the difference between Congress and BJP, right? And obviously, mashallah, it is promising to see what I'm identifying as a new generation of Indian Muslim activists and thinkers who seem to, whether they're from what's the famous university in Uttar Pradesh?
Uttar Pradesh?
Delhi.
The JNU.
Yeah, JNU. Aligarh, there's
Jamia Millia.
Jamia Millia. There's some hope.
Yes.
There seems to be some anti-establishment hope, because after decades of trying to prove your Indianness, trying to prove your loyalty, trying to prove that I just want these basic X, Y, and Z ritualistic practice to be preserved, the rest you guys can do what you want. We will live under you and cause no harm, right? That it's got them nowhere. In fact, it's caused more problems. And to hear Muslim ulama to condemn the Mujahideen of Kashmir and to talk about Kashmir as if it is a part of India and that the resistance is haram and it's rebellion and all this kind of madness.
Even for their own Indian Muslims living inside India that are resisting CAA and RC, telling them that they are also wrong.
So, given that, how can we highlight that opposition to BJP isn't to become a Congressi?
For those of us that live outside of India, it's important to recognize who the legitimate representatives of these causes are. The Congress does not represent the Muslim people. It doesn't. show me who in the Congress is an advocate, staunch advocate. And I don't mean that something happens and they go to the scene and they cry a few tears and they walk away. I'm talking about day in, day out activists. People like Afrin Fatima, people like Sharjil Imam.
Yes.
So many others that
But they're the two that come to mind.
Those are the ones that come to mind right now. So these are the legitimate representatives of not their fathers, not their grandfathers, because those people have had their time, they've made those mistakes, and this generation are now picking up the slack and correcting those measures. Their fathers and their grandfathers were living humble lives, perfectly fine. Not specific. I'm not talking about specifically, but generally the Muslims, as you said, they bent their back a little bit, down. They bowed a little bit. Said, okay, fine. These people, they don't want to take it. They know what their Muslim identity is. They want to make sure that that they are able to maintain it and pray and do what they need to do, all within the Indian constitution. They believe in the Indian constitution, as they should. They're Indians. That's fine. Kashmir is a completely different kettle of fish. Completely. For the Indian Muslims, proving to be, or needing to prove to be Indian, meant being soft on their religion and closer to Hinduism. I mean, this is a reality.
Yeah, of course.
That they had to downplay their Islam and be soft towards Hinduism. They had to go to the pujas and they had to say Jai Shri Ram, whatever it is, and do all those rituals that the Hindus have. They had to do that. Whereas we know that is not
the case for Kashmiris.
It is not within our religion. We're not permitted to even emulate, to copy, even as a joke. It's not for us. So the elders had to do it to survive. But these people, they don't want to survive. They want to flourish. They want their identity to flourish. What is that identity? Not the Indian identity, the Muslim identity.
I heard from some sources and colleagues, who obviously for security reasons can't be named, they said it is our Kashmiri brothers and sisters that are actually the fire in our belly, in our universities, because it is actually the handful that actually have given us the taqat to do what we do. He goes, for many years we've ignored them, we've seen them as troublemakers, anti-nationalists. Many of us turned a blind eye to their oppression just so we don't get targeted. He goes, but truth be told, and a few of them have said this, it is our Kashmiri brothers and sisters actually the fire in our belly.
Alhamdulillah. I mean, look, 70 years too late, but that's fine. We can't hold their fathers, their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers to account. We can hold this generation to account that now have the knowledge, they have the ilm, they have the strength, and they are doing it. We need to help them see it through to the end. The same. Now, we have not gotten our freedom, but we're still so we continue.
Yeah,
we're not stopping, and we pray and we hope and we will assist in whatever shape and form for the Indian Muslims that they also continue their struggle for their rights, be it under the Indian constitution or if they want something separate, we are with them. But as long as they maintain their Muslim identity and they recognize that this is a war on Islam, we are with them and we are with all the Muslims.
A question I wanted to ask you was pertaining to the fact that India is the home of Deoband. It is the home of Nadwatul Islam. It's the home of the Barelvi movement. It is the home of some of the biggest Sunni seminaries and movements in the world. From your knowledge, if any, what has been the stance of the said groups and movements and tariqs to the Kashmiri issue?
I will answer that with a question. And the question is, how many of the people that you mentioned, how many of them have suffered under the various rules inside India? Or have they flourished?
They've flourished. Their numbers have increased.
Then I have no comment. I mean, you can extrapolate from that what that means. Now, I can't question their iman. I can't even question their character. What I can do is offer you and present to you facts that if they have flourished while others have suffered, what does that mean to you?
Can I counter back to you and say, Muzzammil Bhai, is it not better for us to pray our salah, give our zakah, preserve our religion, try to do some very soft dawah in whichever way we can? Isn't that better than trying to advocate for our brothers and sisters, even if that was the intention, even if that was the thinking? I'm not saying it was, but one can present the argument that the preservation of the basic rituals of our religion is important, more important than risking our lives for the cause of Kashmir.
Tell that to the Palestinians, tell that to the Kashmiris, Tell that to anybody that has suffered directly for 70 plus years. Just because they've been blinded, they've worn rose-tinted glasses for so many years, and they've been presented with, benefits to stay within certain parameters, doesn't mean, what do they say, that a frog, if put in hot water, is going to jump out.
Of course.
But a frog that is put in cold water and slowly boiled, he boils to death and he doesn't realize it. That is exactly what is happening there. That they don't realize what is happening to the community, not to them. They know what's happening to them because they're benefiting from it. But the community at large, they don't recognize it because they think they're all, well, if they copy us, then they're going to be fine. But as you said something very important. If we do our zakat and we do our prayers and we do this, is that enough to be a Muslim? That is my only question. Is Islam praying and doing zakat and fasting?
Not.
Is that it?
Of course not.
That is the answer. So anybody that says this soft Islam, maybe I'm not politically correct within the Muslim community, and I doubt that you are either, but I don't believe in this soft Islam stuff that, salah and we go to the masjid. That's not a religion.
It wouldn't have reached our land if it was just that.
Exactly. This is not Islam. Islam is about standing up for your rights.
100%.
What do they say? That it is permissible for you to fight if somebody takes your haqq.
Absolutely.
And in Islam, there is a lot of my haqq that is being taken away from me.
100%. I say this to so many of our youth. I say, listen, brothers and sisters, when I go to university, go to ISOCs, I say, listen, if Islam in reality, in its asl, if the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba, and our noble descendants and forefathers, if they followed the Islam which we are told we should follow, it would not have reached Sindh. It would not reach Morocco. It would not reach Spain. It would not reach the Balkans. It would not reach Far East Asia. It wouldn't have reached any of those places.
No way.
It wouldn't have. It would have just stayed in the Arabian Peninsula.
If even that.
It would have just been Medina, Mecca. Yeah? But it wasn't.
Exactly.
So do not change something that was unchanged for centuries.
Exactly. Do not reinvent the wheel. That is where bid'ah comes into.
Of course, 100%.
And frankly, that will lead towards shirk.
Absolutely.
Do what they did, emulate that. You want to be the best Muslim, everybody wants to be the best Muslim.
Emulate that.
Then emulate them. Don't create a new form of Islam for me. At least not for me. You want to do it for yourself? That's between you and your Lord. Don't impose that upon me. If you don't want me to impose it upon you, don't impose it on me either.
So just staying on India and the Muslims of India, right? A very, very sizable minority, right? Hyderabad, Gujarat, Assam, there's many other states that have...
Even in South India.
Yeah, that have quite sizable communities. What has your feeling been, not with the new wave of Muslim activists that are coming, alhamdulillah, that we've seen for the last 3, 4, 5 years. What's your general feel been, or understanding been, towards the sentiments of these people? I know it's very hard in the absence of opinion polls and data and all that stuff, but generally from your limited observations and interactions, why is there a sense of, let's put complicity aside, but passiveness and neutrality? Is it really the fear of not being seen Indian or not being seen as loyal or Indian enough? Is it really that?
That apathy existed mostly for that reason. And it's very difficult to understand that until you realize that this has been going on for 3 generations. That every generation is telling the next generation that if you want to survive in this country, then you will have to do your Eid namaz, but you're also going to have to wear the tikka on Navratri or whatever. You have to do it. That's the only way to survive. And because of that, the state itself realized that these people are willing to concede, they're willing to compromise, they're willing to emulate us to survive.
Hence the policy continues.
Not only has the policy continued, they move those borders, they move those conditions, the parameters even more and more and more, constricting the Muslims even more and more and more. And eventually, there is going to be an implosion that we've started to see, that implosion. And it's not just the Muslims now. Remember the farmers' protests?
Yes.
The Sikhs, they organized admirably, fantastically. And even the Khalistan, the farmers' protest is completely different to the Khalistan movement.
Yep.
It was the Indian deep state and the government, the BJP and the RSS, that tried to conflate the two, which essentially meant that the farmers' protests, or the people that were protesting with the farmers, or the Sikhs that had nothing to do with Khalistan, suddenly became, because they were labeled as Khalistani, they became, and then they embraced it. They said, "ठीक है, you want to make Khalistanis? We'll show you Khalistan." So, you know, when we talk about the war on 9/11 and we say that the West created the terrorists by doing it's exactly what India did. They created the Khalistan movement even more stronger than it could have possibly been. Khalsa Aid, the head of Khalsa Aid, he was banned from Twitter as well and restricted in India. I mean, he's an Indian. They've never had problems with Sikhs like that. But why? Because it's not that they want just the elimination of Muslims. It is all minorities that don't conform to their version of Hinduism and Hindutva. And that form of Hinduism and Hindutva means the elimination of all minorities, beginning with the Muslims because they are the majority minority.
Majority minority.
So get rid of them first, and then we'll get rid of the Sikhs, break the Khalistan back, get rid of the Dalits. And now you would think that maybe if people converted to Hinduism that they would be safe. They will never trust even the biggest Muslim that wears a tikka, but prays namaz as well. But because he is a Muslim, he has a name that is Muhammad, or she has a name that is Fatima. They will never trust them.
Sounds like the case of the Moriscos.
I will give you an example, just slightly closer to Kashmir. That Farooq Abdullah, who was a chief minister, one of the, he's the son of Sheikh Abdullah, the traitor Sheikh Abdullah, and this is also Farooq. The most Indian person you can find. Even he was arrested during 370, when they abrogated 370-35. He was even arrested. The biggest Indian, who at one time people were considering to become the president of India. This guy was arrested. Mehbooba Mufti, who went into a joint coalition with the BJP. She went into a joint coalition. She was in bed with the BJP. They put her under house arrest as well. They will never trust
No one stands a chance.
No one. They are meticulous in their fascism and their ideology. They are not willing to compromise. And yet, we see our Muslim brothers and sisters.
So when we present these situations, right? We're talking about Kashmir. We can literally give cases of Palestine, Iraq, Afghanistan, how people willingly engaged with the oppressors, the occupied, whether they were foreign invaders or indigenous ones, and then engaging with them, going into bed with them. You found yourself in prison, exiled, killed. Yet we choose to comply. We choose to compromise. Why do we insist on this? This is just a general question I'm asking you now. I'm not even talking about the Kashmir issue. Why do we have amongst our midst in this ummah, when it comes to matters of injustice, oppression and occupation, do we find willing culprits who don't learn from their policy of compliance?
Survival of the fittest. I know this is very Darwinian here, but in occupation and oppression, and it's maybe not something that people that live in privilege like us, that live in the West, that we would necessarily understand. But people that live in occupation and subjugation, there are two types of people. People that are willing to stand up and fight for their rights, come what may, and others that are willing to compromise to survive another day. Who is right and who is wrong is not up to me to decide. But then even within those people that are willing to compromise to survive another day, you have different levels that suddenly become one with the oppressor. So much so that you can't tell where one begins and the other ends. Lack of iman. Fear. You see, that would be the lowest form of those people that want to concede, that become collaborators because of fear. That you can understand to some level. You can disagree with it, but you can understand it. But then the worst form are those people that directly are collaborators. So people that facilitate states anywhere in the world against Muslims. A Muslim is pointing out to another Muslim and saying that, you know what, he's a bit of a terrorist, which is a bit like the Trojan horse that we had
in Birmingham.
In Birmingham, we've had, even in America, we know that the CIA, even Scotland Yard and MI5 used to hire or not hire, pay Muslims, recruit Muslims to spy in masajids post 9/11. So it's not limited to just, I think now that we're talking about, it's not just conflict zones. Yeah. I think it's just generally when people feel that they are, they're being crushed, that you will do anything to survive. You would even sell, the phrase that he'd sell his mother to the devil. So then it comes down to only one thing. how strong is your iman?
100%.
And people will say that he sold himself for $1 million. Maybe you're not worth. Maybe you won't sell yourself for $1 million, but you might think at $1 billion. If you're not $1 billion, maybe at 10 billion. Everybody has a price. Everybody has a price, unless you have iman.
Of course. Bring the podcast kind of to a close, but I kept this particular area for the ending, and that is Pakistan. Born and raised in Bedford, Luton down the road. Most of my satis and my closest brothers and companions are from AJK. The reason why I know about Kashmir is because of my Kashmiri friends and my Pakistani friends. The reason why I attended the protest from a very young age, whether it be in Bedford or Luton or in London, wherever it may be, was because of my Pakistani friends. And there would be no difference. And I have no friends from occupied Kashmir. They're all from AJK.
I'm your friend.
Of course you are, but you're of course you're my brother. But I'm talking about from young growing up.
I know what you mean.
There was no one from occupied Kashmir, but they will talk as if Kashmir and Pakistan are one and the other. It's synonymous. Meaning, yeah, we might have a flag that looks like it, but really we have no problem waving their flag. It's our flag, and the cricket team is ours, and we are Pakistan. And when I asked them, what about the other side? Some of whom had grandparents that came through partition or escaped war, and there goes, we too also see that as part of Pakistan. So what I will ask you is, how strong is the sentiment on the grassroots level from your understanding, historically speaking, has it been amongst occupied Kashmiris to be a part of Pakistan?
Most of the people that are martyred inside Kashmir, they have a green flag wrapped around their shroud or on their grave. That green represents Pakistan for us. White is, traditionally it's white that represents Islam.
Yep.
Green represents Pakistan. People that have been martyred, be it through armed resistance or be it children, in my memory, I have never seen anybody have anything but green or white. Nothing. None of this red stuff. And people that, majority of these red colors, it's basically nationalism.
Yep.
Nationalistic people that don't necessarily believe in the Islamic principles that, are embedded in this resistance against India. The majority of people inside Kashmir have a great affinity to Pakistan, a great love for Pakistan. I mean, cricket, if it's Pakistan versus anybody in the world, they'll support Pakistan. If it's anybody in the world versus India, they will support anybody in the world. Even Israel against India, no problem. Well, that's a bit of a stretch to say, but that's the love that the people of Kashmir have for Pakistan, for a multitude of reasons. Pakistan have been the greatest advocate for Kashmir. They have sacrificed a lot and suffered a lot because of Kashmir. The FATF, this grey list stuff, India committing, terrorism inside Balochistan, inside Pakistan, the United. I mean, there's so much that is going on that Pakistan have had to suffer because of us. But more importantly, because of that Muslim identity. We are not Pakistani because of one Imran Khan or one Nawaz Sharif or one Benazir Bhutto or Musharraf or Bajwa. We're not. That's not us. We don't affiliate to these things. We affiliate to the state of what it's supposed to represent. Not necessarily what it might be right now, but what the ideology of Allama Iqbal and Qaid Azam Muhammad
And it was a country that was for the safety, for the Muslims to practice their religion freely.
And we recognize this way before even the Pakistanis understood this. And a lot of people don't even appreciate the freedoms that they have. But we recognize it. It is the affinity of what Pakistan was supposed to be and could be. That is our love for Pakistan. Now, in the sense of, do people want to be part of Pakistan? Many people do. Some might not want to. But everybody is on the same principle, as long as they're not collaborators with the Indian state, that nobody wants to be with India. Nobody can be with a person that subjugates and oppresses you. Nobody can be with somebody that has raped your sister or killed your father or enforcibly disappeared your brother. It just doesn't, it can't work that way. Nobody is stupid enough to believe that. But the love for Pakistan is natural. It is instinctive. It is in our DNA. It is, to some extent, our belief because of religion, the religious context. Some people have that affinity because of the religion and some people have it because of the politics. But in all cases, people have that respect for Pakistan. Now, there are a select few and you come from a certain area where you have a lot of nationalists that don't necessarily appreciate the Azad Kashmir flag or the Pakistani flag. And those nationalists are secular. I'm saying this with authority. They are secular. What do I have to do with the seculars? If they believe in their secularism, believe in your secularism. And if you don't want me to impose my Muslim identity and my war, the war that is happening on me because of my Muslim identity, you don't want me to affiliate with you, that's fine. But then don't force your secularism on me. Lakum dinukum waliyadin. You follow yours, I follow mine.
How successful have the secular elements of the opposition or resistance been? Is there a secular resistance? And by secular, I mean we do not want to be...
Not inside, at least not inside Indian occupied Kashmir.
Okay.
Now, people may... certainly, one particular leader inside Indian occupied Kashmir who advocated for independent Kashmir.
Yeah.
A lot of people misappropriate him. A lot of people from his party outside of Kashmir misappropriate him. And they claim the whole secularism and independent Kashmir and anti-Pakistan narrative. That leader is a very, 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 very close brother of mine. I've spent time in jail with him. I know him a lot closer than these people do. They probably have never even spoken to him. But over the years, you know what they say, Chinese whispers, right? So it all just evolves into some.
So what was his
nonsense.
actual position then?
His position was he wanted an independent Kashmir. But he recognized that Pakistan is our only advocate. The guy even got married inside Pakistan. He regularly used to travel to Pakistan. He has friends in Pakistan. I have never, in public nor in private, ever heard him ever say a single word negative towards Pakistan. Yet these people use him as some kind of poster child for anti-Pakistan propaganda, which is misappropriation. Mm-hmm. To the extent that I might even be able to tell you this, I mean, I shouldn't have a problem because when I narrated these stories to him, that these people that claim to be part of your group and claim that you're their leader are saying this, 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 and this, he literally held, I'm so sorry, he held his hands, his fingers to his ears and said, Toba, and he said, tell them that this is not, they do not represent me. I mean, I told him that, look, I can't tell them, I'm not part of your party, and what authority do I have to tell them this? But he does not appreciate nor agree with what these people are saying. And they may claim that that is what his ideology is, but that isn't it. So, and it is a minority. They make a lot of noise, but a lot of empty vessels make a lot of noise.
Conversations that have taken place throughout the decades about the future of Kashmir in terms of its autonomy, in terms of how liberation would look like, how much of those conversations have involved Pakistan? Meaning as a material supporter, as potentially being part of that state, if that's what the people want. Has it always been in the conversation?
Always. Always. There is always... Look, we have legitimate representation inside Indian occupied Kashmir called the All Parties Hurriyat Conference. Their representatives are in Pakistan. Those that had to migrate or were fled, or for whatever reason they had to go to Pakistan, they represent that leadership. This All Parties Hurriyat Conference representation that is in Pakistan is in constant communication with Pakistan authorities. And they're always talking about how, international community needs to be sensitized towards Kashmir, how lobbying needs to happen. They're regularly working together inside the United Nations. Even their own think tanks and they involve Kashmiris, and Kashmiris of course involve Pakistanis, not just in the overt, but even in the covert discussions of how, as you mentioned, what liberation should look like, what are the strategies, what are the tactics, who do we need to approach, how do we get things done, what do we need to launch, different reports that need to be published. Look, the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner, a couple of years ago, he published that report on Kashmir. It was a 100 and something page dossier. It didn't happen in a vacuum, right? These things don't happen in a vacuum. A lot of the times people say, oh, this is amazing, look what happened. There is no prophet in our day right now that is going to perform a miracle.
Of course.
Right? Nothing happens in a vacuum. There's always somebody doing something. And the good thing is that such people do not believe in taking credit. They believe in doing the work for the sake of doing the work, for the sake of sawab, for the sake of the ummah. So a lot of work happens that we aren't necessarily, privy to. But I can tell you with authority that there is a lot of communication between, Pakistanis and Kashmiris to talk and to discuss and strategize about the Kashmir liberation movement.
When we look at occupation, right, whether it's Palestine or Kashmir or Afghanistan or Iraq or any land which has been unjustly occupied by a foreign invader, where Muslims are being oppressed for being Muslim, resistance is something that's just part and parcel, right? In fact, it becomes fard al-ain for the individual to protect his family, his property, his religion, his land and his honour. And there's even international laws to protect this. And do tell us what the international, because I know you cite it when you have to talk about resistance.
I mean,
it's the PC way of justifying resistance.
Yes, not even justify, to ratify. I mean, it's not me or any other resistance leader in history that has mentioned. It is the United Nations Security Council, not a Human Rights Council, Security Council, that talks about that people have the right to defend themselves, their honor, their land, their family. I would go so far as to say that they probably copied it from the texts of Islam.
Because it was pretty verbatim-ish, wasn't
Exactly.
it? Yeah.
A lot of it is, and it's funny, I mean, now I'm probably going off track a little bit, but a lot of these constitutions and the human rights articles and procedures, a lot of it sounds very Islamic.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, a lot of it's rooted in a lot of Islamic
Creeping
laws.
Sharia, right?
Yeah, of course it is. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract theory was a lot of the works of Ghazali and Al-Juwayni and others. So we know, I mean, they may not want to admit it, but
that's
it
where
is
the
what
root is. And maybe they'll say, oh, but it's common sense. Well, then follow Islam.
100%.
The rest of it must be common sense as well.
So considering that armed resistance, right, which whether we are comfortable talking about it or not, I'm talking about those who talk about conflict zones and occupied Muslim lands, whether you see as resistance or jihad fi sabilillah, whatever it may be, the point of the matter is that it has to happen. How do you explain to the Muslims of Gaza or Kashmir or any occupied land that you should just leave your door open and make your women available to be dishonored and for you to be blinded, maimed, killed with impunity?
I have no right to give a fatwa. But if I did, I would say that anybody that rejects people that are oppressed from their right to resist is going towards kufr. Because it is ordained on us to defend ourselves.
100%.
We cannot leave our doors open. In fact, what is it? What is that?
You protect your homes.
The story about the tying the first tie your camel, then have tawakkul.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So you must have your door shut and the lock put, and you put a security alarm, and then you have you cannot leave. It is not. These are not the times of those miracles that happen in the times of the prophets. The miracle that we have is with us. It is the Quran and Sunnah, and we have to apply that. You apply that, the miracle will come. This taboo, for some reason, people find it a taboo to talk about armed resistance and jihad. I mean, fine, there is a context, and fine, people may have misunderstanding about this.
I have a discomfort with Kashmiri Muslims, occupied Kashmiri Muslims, a few that I've spoken to. They refer to the Mujahideen as militants.
Yeah.
It's a language, and I've told them, I said, do you understand that militant has a specific connotation?
Exactly.
It has the connotation of basically a terrorist. That's the... But
separatist, which is another thing.
Yeah.
Language, look, coming from a journalist, I'm so happy that you picked up on this. Because language is so important.
So important.
Right?
Pivotal.
So we may be talking about armed resistance, but we're also talking about jihad. But jihad in the context of the United Nations Security Council resolutions.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
We're not talking about some kind of what the common Westerner.
No, of course.
It's according to our texts, not your interpretation.
Yeah,
number one.
100%.
Number two is that when you say militant or you say security forces, number one, the Indian so-called security forces are not security forces, they're occupational forces. And the militants are, of course, the Mujahideen or the armed resistance. The problem is that when Indian media is shoved down your throat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week,
that language becomes normalized.
That's the problem. The normalization of Indian language, Indian narratives, Indian ideology. You become, not only do the oppressed become desensitized, but imagine the rest of the world. Of course they're never going to understand. When we can't even use the correct terminology, what is the West going to understand? So true.
So there's a colleague, a brother from Srinagar, and I was speaking to him, and lovely brother, and I noticed he's mentioning militants, and he submitted a piece where he actually wrote militants, a language which we obviously have 5%, we reject that kind of language. So I went back to him and I said, look, the militants that you refer to, I goes, what they did, do you believe it was a noble act? Because of course, it's okay. Was it wrong? Of course not. It was. But why do you refer militant? Why do you use the language of militancy? And they couldn't answer it. You were stuck. And I was like, do you understand that militant has a specific connotation of someone who is oppressive, unjust, a religious zealot, ultimately a terrorist?
Exactly.
Right? I said, so whilst you didn't mean it, be mindful of this language and tell others not to use this language.
Absolutely.
There's so many other things you can use to describe
Absolutely.
those who have died in the path of resistance, other than militants.
Absolutely.
So,
Language is key. Language is so important for us.
How much of the resistance is Islamic? Do we have secular resistance? Do we have nationalist resistance? Do we have, like, for example, if we take Palestine and Syria, Palestine, because it's an older conflict, and you know, we had Fatah, we had Yasser Arafat, was a socialist, was an Arab nationalist, right? Wasn't much overt Islamic sentiments or principles in his worldview in terms of the future of Palestine. When Syria kicked off, you had Islamic sentiments, elements, you had secular elements, you had pro-democratic elements. What's the setup like in terms of Kashmiri resistance from your knowledge?
Well, at the moment, I would put to you that anybody that has been martyred in the resisting Indian occupation has been doing it because of the Muslim identity. They've been doing it under the garb of Muslimness. I can't see anybody, unless you can tell me, which secular person has been martyred in the last 20 years fighting the resistance. It has always been from particular groups, with a particular ideology, with particular language. It's just that group, the people that believe that this is an Islamic. And then those people that when they're martyred, people like Burhan Wani, Manan Wani, Riyaz Neku, Junaid Sehrai, all of these people, if you see the number of people that come to their funerals,
huge. Burhan Wani was massive.
Mind-boggling. So, I mean, which secular person inside Kashmir is resisting the Indian oppression by armed resistance, and how many people are going to their funeral? So, in reality, it is whether they accept, whether the people in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Look, let me put it to you in a different way. I cannot, nor can anybody else for that matter, tell the people of Indian-occupied Kashmir what your resistance should look like and how it should be. Our job is to represent it justly, not impose upon them. A lot of people will impose their own ideology and say that Kashmir's resistance is this, but it doesn't exist on the ground, so why are you saying it is this when it is not? We need to represent truthfully. In the old days, there have been maybe, on balance, some that was towards nationalism and some that was towards Islam and Pakistan. That phased out. And the only thing that remained was the Islamic. In Kashmir, most of the oppression happens in terms of institutional, when it comes to the institutions. Jamaat-e-Islami, banned. Some other Islamic institutes, not just religious, but also the schools that are run by Muslims, that has also been banned. Tehreek-e-Hurriyat, banned. Anything that had any link to Islam was banned, including the JKLF, which is independent. I don't want to say secular. A lot of people will tell you it's secular. Go to
Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front.
Jammu Kashmir. Go if you. None of these people know Yasin Malik, who is the head of the. I know him very personally, very intimately. He's not a secular. No way he can be secular. The guy shouted at me for not praying on. I was traveling, so I do Jama Bain Salat. So I can. He shouted at me for this. He said, "What kind of Muslim are you?"
Must be a staunch Hanafi.
And these people are, that's what I meant when I said misrepresentation of a man, that it just doesn't. Anyway, so people that believe that this is a secular movement or it is a nationalistic movement, it may be for them. Whoever says it, it may be for them. But inside Kashmir, our women and our sisters and brothers and fathers, when they make dua in Ramadan and you see that they talk about the Muslim identity, say, Sayan Musliman karti hifazat. Protect our Muslims. The Muslims in Palestine, the Muslims in Iraq, the Muslims in Afghanistan, the Muslims all over the world. That's the duas that they make. They don't say for our nationalist Kashmir movement, for the nationalist Uyghur movement, for the nationalist Palestinian movement. They talk about the Muslims. And Tell me anybody that is secular, that goes to the masjid on Jummah and says Ameen when the Imam says Fi kulli makan.
Absolutely. Everyone says it.
Then a secular shouldn't say that because he shouldn't even be in the mosque in the first place.
Of course not.
So nationalism, secularism, these are, I won't say that it's complex, but it's misappropriated, misrepresented.
And many times, Muzzammil, I've noticed that particular types of nationalism, I wouldn't say secular, particular types of nationalism is infused with Islam.
Yes.
Doesn't make it right.
Yes, exactly.
It doesn't make it right because I've always maintained the position that Pakistan's nationalism is very much embedded with a concept of Islam, right? Compared to, let's say, Turkish nationalism.
Whether it's successful or not is a different argument.
Yeah, and whether it's right or wrong is another. But the point is, their nationalism to many Pakistanis is synonymous to Islam.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. So you're right. Secularism is different. The nationalism, I think, maybe I'll retract a little bit and say that the nationalistic movement in Kashmir, even then, that nationalism is not one for secular nationalism.
Yes, because secular nationalism is Islam will have zero say in how a future state would look, how the liberation would look, how the resistance would look, how the identity of this country would look, how the constitution would. That is obviously, that's that type of secularism. But I've seen certain types of nationalism, mainly with Pakistanis actually, that when I engage with them, I speak with them, it's actually, they see it as one and the both. Doesn't make it okay all the time, but I understand where it's come from.
Exactly.
Last question to close today's podcast. What is it that Kashmiris want from their brothers and sisters around the world? What is it in terms of meaningful, tangible actions? What is it that you want?
The least that a Muslim could, what do they say? That when you see evil, you must act against it. And if you can't act against it, at least speak against it. If you can't speak against it, the lowest form of Iman is hating it in your heart. I'm telling you, the Muslims around the world have more Iman than just hating it in their heart. They can at least speak against it. I'm not asking anybody to act against it. It has always been an indigenous movement inside Kashmir, and it will remain an indigenous movement. But at least speak about it. Represent Kashmir in the best to the best of your abilities. The best way that I can give the advice to Muslims, that, what do Kashmiris want? It is the same what what you do for the Palestinians. Let's not ask what the Palestinians want. Let's say what you do for the Palestinians, what you do for the Rohingya, what you do for the Afghans, what you do for the people of Syria, for the people of Yemen. Do for us. That is what we expect. When we see everybody do it for all the other Muslims, we ask you, are we not part of that ummah? Do we not bleed the same way that they do and that you do? It is as simple as that. Intangible things, it is writing to your MPs, it is lobbying the right people, it is getting the information from the correct sources, using the correct language, following 5 pillars, following Dilawar, making sure that you have the correct narrative in play, that you don't fall to the Indian propaganda and the same way that people don't watch the BBC and ITV and Channel 4 and Sky News and Fox News to get their information about Palestine, the same way please don't watch Indian news channels and listen to Indian commentators about Kashmir. Listen to the Kashmiris. What do they say? That it's something that you often do, that just because you have the mic doesn't mean you have to speak for me. Sharing the mic with me is enough.
Absolutely.
And this is the most important thing. If you have platforms, share your platforms in your universities, in your masajids, wherever it may be. One of the most important things that I have found is literature. We don't have, for every one book that is written on, I'm exaggerating, but for every one book that has been written on Kashmir, there are probably 1,000 books written on Palestine. We don't have enough information and literature. We need to consolidate information and literature and use that as a lobbying tool around the world. Go to the high commissions, to the think tanks, to the foreign offices, to grassroots organizations. There are so many people around us that can do something, want to do something, but don't have it's not the ability, but don't have the resources to do it. We need people, we need volunteers, we need people to commit their time. Now we don't have billions and millions of dollars to supply people. We do this fi sabilillah, we do this in our free time, whenever we can. And we ask you to do the same. People, I remember in our day, I don't know if it's still happening, when we used to go to university, you'd have that Islamic week, the
Islamic Awareness Week.
Awareness, where the people do fundraising for different charities. If you could spend a week doing that, I'm sure you can spend 1 hour of your day or 1 hour of your week doing something for Kashmir. Anything for Kashmir, something tangible. Get in touch with the Kashmiri, learn something about Kashmir. At least share the knowledge. If you can't do it, at least the sharing of knowledge, you don't know where you're going to plant that seed. I don't believe that I can, there is no way that I believe that I can liberate Kashmir. No way. I don't think any of my generation could. But what I do believe is somebody in the next generation might. And the least that we can do is plant that seed and be the shoulders that they can stand on. That is what we can do. So be those shoulders that others can stand on. Give the platforms to those people that can do something. Support different institutions that are working for the Kashmir cause. And that doesn't necessarily mean Muzzammil Ayyub Thakur. There are many other people much more competent, much more knowledgeable than I am. And it's not just about Kashmiri organizations, it is even about institutions in the United Kingdom that represent and reflect and report about Kashmir, like 5 Pillars do. And I'm not saying this just because you're here, it makes no difference to me. I don't owe you anything, you don't owe me anything, but it is the truth. Very rarely I have seen other institutions, other organizations, and other social media, not users, vloggers, platforms, people that talk about Kashmir without naming names, but we lobby them. It's not just me. Many people lobby them, talk about Kashmir, but they end up talking about Kashmir in the context of the Muslims of India. But these are 2 separate issues. So the knowledge isn't there. So we need to reach out. And I would say, as a task for anybody that's watching this, reach out to other YouTubers, vloggers, tweeters, Facebookers. That's just social media. Then you have the world of the mainstream media. Then you have the world of think tanks and foreign policymakers. There is an entire world out there. If you sit down and think for 5 minutes, and if you don't want to think, I'll give you that list. Target one person and make an effort on that. Usually what do? We throw spaghetti in the wall and we think whatever sticks. Let's focus on one person, all of us together, and make sure we can get them on board. You know, even celebrities, what's wrong? You remember when Sudan, when they broke up South Sudan and North Sudan? Mm-hmm. Who were the celebrities? It was, what's his name? Matt Damon.
Yes, that's a huge Hollywood
What's that
names.
guy's name? George Clooney.
Yes.
All of those celebrities, they broke up, I mean, obviously with the help of the State Department, but why can't we? Why can't you and I? Why can't we reach out to some of the Islamic scholars that people have become fanboys and fangirls of? You know exactly what I'm implying. The ones that tell Kashmiris that may God save, protect us from the Kashmiris. Why don't we? You remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, of course.
So why can't we get to these people? Leave the religious scholars for a moment. Let's talk about just regular people that are making their TikToks and their YouTubes and the people that create Islamic content. People that have 1,000, 10,000, 1 million views speak about Kashmir just once. Fine, you might not get that many views, but at least you can face your Lord in Akhirah and say that I did my part. I did my part.
Muzzammil, Jazakallah khair. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He not just relieves the occupation depression of the Muslims of Kashmir, but He Azza wa Jal gives them victory.
Ameen.
And liberation.
Ameen.
And
all of us.
To us all. And specifically that I pray that our sons and our daughters can give to this cause like they've given to the other causes like Palestine and others. Ameen.
Ameen. And because you have the Palestinian shirt, I will end with a small anecdote.
Bismillah.
Several years ago, yet again, Israel had bombed Palestine. Protests erupted all over the world. Only one person in the entire world during those protests had been martyred protesting for Palestine. It was a Kashmiri.
Subhanallah.
We bleed for the Ummah. And we ask the Ummah to at least, not bleed for us, make dua for us and make some effort for us too.
Brothers and sisters, I hope you thoroughly enjoyed today's podcast. A lot of it was difficult information and realities to absorb and take in. But inshallah, we narrate and go over these things to empower us, as a source of energy for us to act and not to be disempowered. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives victory and liberation of the Muslims of Kashmir. Ameen and elsewhere. Brothers and sisters, if you enjoyed this podcast, subscribe to our channel. You'll find us on all the major audio platforms. Of course, if you're watching via YouTube, click subscribe, like this video, share this video, leave a comment. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Blood Brothers Podcast, a 5 Pillars production.